Alright, well, we're going to begin the 7th grade design project today, and although there is a video that shows you how to lay out your paper, I'm going to go ahead and quickly do this anyhow for those of you that may not have seen it, and but it will be quick, so if you don't understand it, you're probably going to have to review the video on how to lay out the paper for the project, and I believe that is in the first part of this instructional video. So we're going to spell out a message here, but we're going to have to put it into boxes very similar to how we did it last year. So we're going to simply just go ahead and measure off by threes. Now if you have an 18-inch ruler or a yardstick that you have cut down to 18 inches, then this is much easier. Otherwise you have to watch the video that I put up so that you can figure out how to do it with a typical ruler. However, this is really quick work if you have an 18-inch ruler, or you just find an old yardstick and cut it down to about 18 or 20 inches. Then we simply just go along and we're going to connect our dots carefully. I'm using a typical pencil today too, by the way, and that will let you all know that you can use just the equipment and materials that you find around your own house to do this. Now we are using an 18 by 24 inch piece of paper, excuse me, a 12 by 18 inch piece of paper, and we're just measuring off by threes, 3, 6, and 9 accurately. And we're going to do the same thing over here. We're going to measure off 3, 6, and 9. Yeah, 3, 6, and 9. Okay. And we're going to furthermore connect those dots together with our 18-inch ruler or a cut-off piece of yardstick, which works just as fine, and that's why I've used this one so many times for so many purposes. It's really a very useful tool in your arsenal if you're going to draw, especially on work that's, 12 by 18 inches. It's pretty standard size for artwork, especially in school. Alright, now what we have got here now is 24 squares. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 by 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so we have our 24 squares, and we're going to spell out this particular message. An ounce of prevention is greater than a pound of cure. Now I know that's a hashtag in most people's world these days, but when I was a child that was a pound sign. So it's going to spell out an ounce of prevention is greater than a pound of cure. So that is 24 characters if you count them all out carefully. There will be one character in each box. The very first, of course, will be an A up here, and then the last one down here will be the E in cure. So we're simply going to go through and letter each box with one of these letters so that we do not misspell this. Many times it is totally possible to misspell this, and when you do, it really is difficult to fix it. So an ounce of prevention . Prevention is greater than, we'll just put a greater than symbol right there. We don't have to put it in that large. Get carried away already having to start the project. Is greater than a pound of, and the last 4 letters, cure. And so, what we've done is we've taken this message, an ounce of prevention is greater than a pound of cure, and we've transferred that letter, an English letter, spelled it all out, so if keeps us from making mistakes. Mistakes can still be made, without doubt, but in this case it probably reduces the incidence of that. So, now we're going to get started with the drawing portion of this. So, as you recall, we did a worksheet and we colored it in a previous session, and so make sure your name is at the top of this. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and put my name at the top of it. I'm Mr. Mathis. That way, if I get separated from my work, I can get it back to you. Okay, and we also are going to use these colors when we start doing the coloring it in. Okay, so gray and then the darker brown and on this list. So you want to have this little list next to you frequently, although I will be displaying it frequently too. So we'll just move that off to the side for now, and we're going to look at our worksheet as we move along in our project. And I'm going to use a smaller ruler for this. It's much easier to navigate around the paper and much more like what you might have at your own workstation here. So if you were in my 6th grade class, you're familiar with this project at some level, but then in the 7th graders, I let you choose how to construct your own alphabet based on the colors that you'd like from that selection we just said. So we know that the letter A is 3 inches wide, so if we simply take our ruler and we measure it off to 1.5 inches, or accurately estimate, then we can simply split that in half. We look at the letter A, it's split in half, and it has a notch in it right there. Now for me, I feel good about estimating, so I can come down what I estimate is about halfway, come in a little bit, maybe a 1/2 inch, and put a dot right there, a registration dot, and then all I have to do is connect these dots to the corner. And I can make it look almost exactly the same every way, every time I use that letter A throughout this project if I pay attention to what I'm doing. Now the letter N requires a little bit more effort than the letter A. In fact, we use the half-half method on this. We could estimate halfway and then cut it in half and half again, just like as if we were going to cut a tray of brownies. That would be this letter right here with all the patchwork coloring in it. However, I feel more confident by just measuring this personally. And so if I measured it off to 1.5 right there, at least I've got that center measurement really accurate. So now I can put a vertical line that's parallel to the lines I'm working with here, my grid lines, and I've cut it in half. Now I feel good about estimating. I'm going to cut this in half visually with a registration dot. Same thing over here with a registration dot. And then I'm going to find my dot, and I want to run parallel as much as possible to the grid lines there. And I make a line, and I cut it in half, and I do that again. I cut it in half again. So I've gone half, half, half. That's the system we use here. Now, I need to do the exact same thing sideways, just like if I was cutting up pizza or brownies. So I really like to measure it off for the first one, just to get that 1/2 in there. So at 1.5 inches, I'm going to make a mark. And then I'm going to accurately level with the grid lines in the top of the paper, cut my horizontal line in halfway. And then I feel pretty good about estimating after that. So I can go about halfway, and I can go about halfway. And that's how we will be able to kind of get this to look level. It looks a little strange to me, but I guess I'm going to have to live with it. There's never really perfect solutions in artwork many times, and we'll do the same thing here. I'm going to use the ruler upside down in this case so that I can try to match this line a little better right there. And so I'm looking at it's a little tilty, but I'm going to have to live with it. And when I color it in, perhaps I'll be able to fix that up a little bit. But so there we go. We go half, 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 and then half, half, and half again. That's all there is to it. Now we move on to the letter O and ounce. So we've done A and N and we go to the letter O and ounce. This is a pretty simple one. We simply go from the upper left-hand corner to the lower right-hand corner. And I like my ruler right side up in most cases. So here we go. We hold our ruler down firmly from corner to corner, take our pencil, strike our mark. It couldn't be easier, right? The letter Z in ounce is just four triangles meeting in the middle. It's almost like a perspective drawing, if you know what that is. And we just go corner, corner. It's the same thing as the letter O, but twice. So we go corner, corner again. This is a letter that doesn't get used very frequently, so I'm happy to see it's part of our phrase that we're using for this E lesson. Or it's a makeup lesson in some cases. Or we might even try this in the visual arts classroom and see what happens when we show it almost like it was an instructional video, which I suppose it is. Alright, let's move on here. Now we're back to O again, and the O is we're doing all these diagonal markings. We just did an O over here, so we can simply reference our worksheet, orient our ruler from the top left to the lower right again, and then we're just going to make our mark. Nothing could be simpler, really. This whole section up here is very visually exciting when it gets colored in, I'm going to predict. Now the letter F is a little bit more complicated because, in my opinion, I think we need to do measuring for this. Some people can accurately estimate these things. However, I'm not comfortable doing that with this particular letter. So I'm going to measure it. If you feel comfortable estimating and you come out with a good product, well, that's fine, but I'm going to have to measure this off. So it says about 1.5 inches here. I'm going to put a registration dot on the side there. I'm going to do the exact same measurement up here at the top at about 1.5 inches, it looks like, right there against the top of the box. Same thing sidewards. I'm going to 1.5 inches and make a dot, and then I'm going to do the same thing again. If I could get my ruler up, let's go to right here up against the edge of the box, 1.5 inches right there. Now all I really have to do is now connect the dots. If I do the measurement, it should be accurate. Now if you're estimating, a lot of times what people do is they estimate and then they will draw a very light layout line that can be erased easily later. I'm going to pronounce that a little bit more, but you should draw it lightly. And then the same thing sideways. And that helps them kind of get their bearings if they're going to estimate it that way. I recommend simply just measuring it. It works much better. So I'm going to erase that because that's not what I did. I measured it out, and I think what we're going to find is I'm going to have a very symmetrical diamond shape. But measuring is an important part of making artwork, and especially making design work like we are doing right now. It is pretty critical. Alright, let's get our implement here. We're going to go from corner to corner, or dot to dot, in this case, dot to dot, and then once again find our spots here, and we go from dot to dot, and then we do the same thing all the way around. So the measuring takes what, an extra like 10 seconds to do, but it gives you really good results. Whereas estimating, you may save 10 seconds, but sometimes it doesn't make. I'm going to turn my ruler around. Sometimes it doesn't make for such the great, results. So there's times you gotta just take the extra 10 seconds. Man, what are you gonna do for that other 10 seconds? So I've got a very attractive looking diamond shape in the middle of that, and I'm stoked about that. So let's move on here. Now the letter P is a little more complex. It's although it shows it as a rectangle on our worksheet that we made, it's actually going to end up as a square on this particular piece of artwork because we're working with squares, not rectangles in this case. Now to do the letter P, we've got to center up a box inside of a square. So a square inside a square. We're going to lightly go from corner to corner. This line needs to be erased later, and although you may see me bolding it, you should draw it lightly. We're going to do the exact same thing in the other direction. Oh, man, my ruler skidded. Okay, don't let that happen to you. Hold that ruler down firmly. Okay, so we've got our layout lines. Now all we've got to do is put a tiny dot in the middle there that we can erase easily later, and we're going to measure out from the center of this, let's just say 1 inch. We'll keep it simple. Yeah, 1 inch. So we'll go from the 0 to a 1, put a dot on the line. We do the same thing on we'll just go all the way around, make it simple. We'll park that on the 0, put a dot on the line. I'm going to pronounce it so you can see it. We're going to go all the way around. We're going to put the 0 on the dot. We're going to put a dot at the 1. And lastly, we're going to do the same thing again here. And I have a bit of an obstruction, but so I'm going to have to do this backhanded. Check this out. We're going to put the 1 on the dot, and we'll put a dot here. So it should be 1 inch any way you measure it. Then we're just going to look at what we've got. It should look as though they're centered up, and we're going to go around and we're going to connect our dots. Now, I like to do two side ones first, so to make sure they kind of match. That gives you a little bit of artistic license if you gotta, you know, fake it a little bit. Okay, it looks pretty good. And we'll turn the ruler upside down so we can get a good look at that square we just made there. That looks pretty good too. Hold that ruler down, strike in your line. Now all we've got to do is go back and erase our layout work. So that's an important part. That's why you want to do this with a very light touch, although I bolded it so that you could see what I was doing here. Okay, and then the same thing over here. And when we color this in, we're going to cover up any of these little stray marks, hopefully. But we may have to go through and spend a little time cleaning up the drawing so that we can prepare it to color. It does take a while to prepare the whole surface for coloring, and then the coloring will go much faster if your surface is clean. Okay, that will do for now. So, we're moving on to the R in prevention. And R is also a little bit more complicated letter. It's that kind of that plus sign or that cross in the middle of the square. And so we've done some measuring already. In fact, we can kind of put that little dot back in there lightly to help us index, is what we're going to start doing here. So we're going to draw some layout lines again for our letter R. And strangely, we measured this one off on the letter N so we can lay our ruler right against that line. And we're going to accurately divide it, and this is going to be lightly done. It has to be erased later. We do the same thing from our dot in the letter P, which we know is in the middle because we measured it off by doing our crossed lines. So that looks pretty good too. So we can index it. We don't have to measure sometimes to get it in the right spot. So we've got our layout work now for the letter R. And we will erase this later, so it should be done with a light touch. So we find our line, we slide over just a bit, and we're going to draw a slightly darker line. We'll do the same thing on the other side. We get this, we slide it over just a bit, hold our ruler down firmly, draw a slightly darker line. So now we've got the layout line in the middle and our markings on either side. We're going to do the same thing below it. Now when we lower this ruler or this straight edge to the right distance, we'll notice we get squares right here. And when we get those squares, that's our turn to actually draw the real marking here. We're going to do the same thing above the layout line. I'm simply turning my ruler upside down. So we find our line and we slide up until we see the squares. And then not just that, we see that these four squares form a bigger square. And that's a pretty good indication it's time to draw that line. So we can do that on either side right here. Now the key, if you've drawn lightly, is to go back and erase all your layout work. And if you drew lightly, it will come out very easily. Now I worked a little bit, I put a little bit more pressure on the pencil to bold the lines so they're visible in this video. However, you want to do that with a light touch. And that's one of the big secrets, I guess, in drawing, is to be able to draw so you can see what you're working on, and then discard the parts that you don't like, and then bold up or emphasize the lines that you do like. And that's how, when you're watching somebody sketch, that's what they're really doing. Excuse me. I've been talking a lot in these videos. Starting to wear out my voice. Okay, got that cleaned up. So some of these letters take a lot longer than others, but then we've got the letters E and the letters O. They don't take much effort or time. Now, speaking of which, we have the letter E coming up here. So that's really quite simple. The letter E is just simply split sideways horizontally. And so we're moving on to the letter E, and that's pretty simple. It's only one horizontal marking sideways. So I'll show you here. So we'll just use our little registration mark that we may still be able to see there, or measure off 1.5 inches if that's really what you got to do. But if we do some accurate measurements early in this project, then it helps us to find the solutions much easier later. It's a little bit tilty, but I'm going to live with it because I know that when I color it, I can address a lot of this. Alright, moving on. let's see here. I'm going to have to think about this one for a moment here. And so the letter V is shaped like an X. Strangely, you'd think it would be shaped like a V, but it's shaped like an X. And so we're going to do layout lines just like we did for the letter R. And we should draw these lightly. However, I'm going to draw them a little bit heavier so that you can see what I'm doing here. So there's one of them. And we're going to go from this direction to this direction too. So now it's funny because it's the letter Z, which is right above it, but we're going to change it from a letter Z into a letter V. So we find our layout line, we slide downwards a bit, maybe about to right here, looks good, and then we're going to strike in a mark. We do that above the line too. So we're going to find that line, and we're going to strike in our mark. Hold that ruler down firmly. I'm really holding it down. We do the same thing in the other direction. Find that V, slide up a bit. Now if you watch the video on how we get to see those diamond shapes in there. See, just like the squares in the letter R. On how to do the worksheet, then you've probably already had a little bit of practice making these letters, and that's good. So look, diamonds there, we've got more diamonds. They should make one nice diamond in the middle, all four of them together. If that is the way it is, then you've got it right. Now we simply have to erase our layout work. Now my layout work's a little darker because I had to press down for the purpose of a video. But your layout work should be done very lightly so that you can just barely see it, but you know where it's at. But instructional videos are not really the same as making your own personal artwork. Although I gotta say, I've been pretty happy with some of the pieces of artwork that have come out of my demonstration videos here. So the one from the 6th grade design project is really quite good. I'm impressed with it. I may have to frame it like a 6th grade project would be framed by a parent. Alright, so we've got our letter V. Look, we're back to the letter E again. What else could be easier? We just did it right here. Easy E. There it is. Sideways marking, horizontal. In fact, if we've done our work right on the letter V and the previous E, we should be able to simply just reference that line. And it looks to me like that E, that line, and it passes right through the triangular portion of that. So I'm going to guess that that's pretty straight. That's pretty much the right place for it. Alright, and it looks to me like that's correct. So look, we're making very good progress here. Now I understand that you may not be able to produce this at the same rate that I am doing it at, simply because I've got a lot more experience with this than you do. But, you know, you should be able to watch along with the video. I've got to uncurl this. You should be able to watch the video and follow along, so that you can, if you can't keep up with my production, and I realize that's possible, then you should pause the video or run it slower or just go back and review until you catch up. This is not about how fast you make the artwork, it's simply about how good you do it. Now we're back to the letter N. Now I measured off up here above this on the letter F, and we can use the half-half method because I know that's an accurate measurement. Now if you estimated, you might have problems. You should probably measure now. So I'm going to cut it in half, and I'm going to estimate half, and I'm going to estimate half again. And then I'm simply, so I've gone half, I'm going to go half, and then I'm going to go half again. Half, half, half. That's why it's called the half-half method or half-half technique. You see it a lot in artwork. Now I'm betting that that E there is halfway as well, because it was half and half and half here. So we can simply lay our straight edge or ruler against that line, sideways, nice and level, and we're going to cut it in half. And then we're just going to estimate half of that and half of that. And we can put our ruler on the dot, and we can make sure it's nice and level, and we can get our halfway. And then I'm going to work on the bottom of my ruler this time. I want it to be a little bit better than my first letter N. And there we go, half, half, half. So we get 4 by 4, 16 uniform squares. And that's really quite attractive. We've already gone halfway through the drawing. Now I realize this is normally would take a couple of days for students to do. And so this demonstration goes by a little bit quicker when I make the artwork. However, you should definitely take your time with this. This usually takes 2, maybe 3 days of class time when we are drawing this together in class. But there's fewer distractions and disruptions right now, and so that makes it somewhat easier to do. Now, let's get on to our letter T here. And the letter T is simple. It's 3 stripes. It means that we only got to draw 2 lines. I like to measure this one because I don't have anything to measure off of here. So I'm going to put my ruler on there. I'm going to mark it at 1, and I'm going to mark it at 2. And so now, if I really wanted to be accurate, I would mark it at the top also. I feel confident, though, that I can make it parallel to this grid line. So I'm going to look at that grid line, and I'm going to mark my line, and I'm going to mark another one parallel to that one. In fact, I'm going to do that. So you can turn it this way as well, but it's more complicated to work backhanded. And I can follow the edge of this paper and try to make it parallel to that. But you've got to hold your ruler down firmly, and you've got to have confidence to work backhanded. And there we have 3 1-inch stripes, simply because we measured them all out. And what could be simpler? So this is a rather interesting message. It's got a lot of different types of shapes and characters going on in it, and so it should be, when it's done, it should be very visually interesting to look at. And so I'm going to have to take a moment here. I'm going to move this aside so we can check it out while I am sharpening my pencil, because my pencil has kind of gotten dull on me here. And you want a good working tip on your pencils and your colored pencils. You don't want it so sharp that, you know, it just breaks off the moment you try to use it. But this poor pencil I'm trying to use here seems like it's had a hard life. Its lead keeps snapping and falling out. That'll work. I've got a good working point there. Now, the letter I is simply a circle in the middle of a square. Now, you can freehand it if you want, but you might come out with something that looks more like a potato or an egg shape, or a fried egg even. So what I like to do is use a compass. You might have to find a small circular object, you know, that's big enough to fit in here but not take up the entire square. But I like to use a compass. Now, if you've been in my class before, you've seen how we use these things. They spin around and they make, you know, interesting shapes. Circles mainly. I'm going to estimate what I think is the very middle of this. If you really needed to know, I guess you could figure that out, but I would say just estimate it. Then I take my compass and I'm going to put the little metal part right over top of that dot, if I can find it. There it is. And then I'm going to check it to make sure it's in the middle. It might not, that's kind of mainly in the middle. And then I put my pencil in the last little hole in this spinner. And then I go down the block a couple times with it. When I lift up, I've got a circle in the middle of the square. That's really quite simple as well. However, you may need to use a pattern of some sort, a small lid or a stencil if you have one, or if you've got one of those compasses with a point on it and you know how to use that, you could certainly try that as well. And so that is totally usable as a tool. But a compass is the actual proper tool for the job, so if you got one, you get it out and use it. Alright, now we're back to easier letters again. Sometimes we go through easy letters, sometimes we got really complicated ones. It looks like we got another letter N coming up. That's a tough one. Okay, letter O. In this case, we're looking it up here. Here it is. It's simply from the upper left to the lower right. We've done it, it looks like a couple of times already. So it seems like there's a good variety of complexity and simplicity in these letters. So we simply orient our straight edge and we strike one good mark diagonally. How easy is that? Now we're starting to get into a situation where we can use some of our previous markings to help us do the letter N, and that's really helpful. So we find this notch, that triangle, the peak of that triangle. If we did that right, otherwise we got to measure it 1.5 inches. But I'm going to just try to prove what I'm saying is correct. So if I were to measure it off at 1.5 inches, and I'm going to put a mark right at 1.5 inches, Now, I'm thinking that this, because it was accurately done, is right in the middle. And it looks to me like that's pretty much right in the middle. So my accurate measurements are true. So if you do good measurements, you can index or reference off of a previous marking. And in this case, the letter N, it's halfway. So I'm going to put it here, I'm going to look at it, and I'm going to strike my line. Now I can estimate halfway of that, and halfway of that, and then I can draw my lines, making sure I'm parallel to the side of the box. Okay? Speed of production is not as important as quality. So we're going to try to match this line, or if you want to work backhanded, the grid line on the squares. And I like to do that sometimes. So I'm going to try to orient myself straight up and down. I'm going to hold my ruler down firmly here while I make my marking. And then make my mark. And I should have come out with half, half, and half. We do the exact same thing in the other direction. Now this was estimated, so I don't trust it as much as I would measuring it. So I'm going to go back to measuring this time. And I go 1.5 inches right there. So that allows me to cut it in half. And I'm going to try to get it level there. I've been struggling with that a bit here. And then I'm going to go halfway. I'm going to estimate accurately half. I'm going to estimate accurately half again. And then I can orient my ruler so it's nice and level, parallel to the previous lines. Draw my mark. I'm going to use the bottom of the ruler this time. And I'm going to orient it so that I can see it should be pretty level. It looks pretty good. Sometimes you gotta fake it a little bit. Get it right down there on that dot. There we go. That's much more accurate. And I've got a sharp pencil. So, oh wow. You know what that means? It means we've come to the end of this particular working period. So, we've done tremendous work. If you've been keeping up with the instruction, then you really are doing tremendous work. If you have fallen behind a little bit, well then, you know, pause the video and catch up. It may take some people longer than it does others. But being able to fill out the first 3 rows with complicated letters in them and having some of these interesting characters coming up for the next one, we should be able to, at least at the instructional video rate, be able to finish this, clean it up, and then begin the coloring next time. So, keep working.